So would you like to have more kindness in your life? Would you like to be feeling like you're receiving more good things? Wouldn't that be nice? Of course it's nice. We would love to have more kindness and goodness. Well, that's what we're going to explore in this video. How do we get more of that into our lives? Hi, my name's Todd, and we're going to be looking at a miracle in the book of Kings, the first book of Kings, and it's a story about the prophet Elijah. He needs to survive. He needs food and water. So God says, I want you to go to this town of Zarephath. You're going to find a widow there, and she's going to give you the bread and the water that you need. So Elijah, like a good prophet, he goes off to Zarephath, and he finds this widow, and he says, Widow, would you get me a drink of water? And by the way, I'd also like for you to bake me some bread. And she says to him, Hey buddy, I don't know if you've realized this, but there's a famine in the land. There's no food to go around. I've got a little bit of flour and a little bit of oil left. I'm about to make myself a cake for me and my son. We're going to split that up, and then we're just going to lay down and die because we've got nothing else and we have no hope for anything. Elijah says, I'll tell you what, you go ahead and you bake that cake, you do that up, and I'll tell you what, if you give some to me first, I promise you that jar of oil and that jar of flour will never run out for as long as I'm with you. So, the woman has a choice. Who's she going to serve? Is she going to serve herself and her son, or is she going to serve Elijah? Well, she makes the right choice. She chooses to serve Elijah, and as a result, what the prophet says comes true. The oil and the flour never run out. So what's this story trying to tell us? That if we meet the right pastor, the right man of God, that our food supplies will never run out? Well, I've done a video before on the meaning of bread in Scripture, and you can see that over here. And the idea is that bread represents goodness. And that the idea here is that, well, goodness, well, when you give it away, it just keeps on multiplying. It gets bigger and bigger. Unlike flour and normal food that when you consume it, it goes away. Well, guess what? With spiritual food, the more you give it away, the more it multiplies. That's why you see in the New Testament, Jesus can feed 4,000 or 5,000 people with just a few loaves of bread and some fish, because they too are symbols for goodness, and it never runs out. But the key in this story for us in this widow is that you've got to give something away first in order to get something back. You know, you don't stand in front of a stove and say, Stove, when you give me some heat, I'll give you some wood, right? It doesn't work like that. You got to put something out. I got to give the wood first in order to get the heat. You don't go into your boss and say, Boss, if you give me a raise, I'll work harder. I'll show up on time. I'll do extra hours. Actually, I actually knew a guy who did that once, and it didn't work out well for him. The boss pretty much just said, all right, you know, it's time for you to go, time for you to leave the company if that's your attitude. Because the way it works in the real world, is that you work harder first, and then you get the raise. Well, it's the same thing true with spirituality. You've got to put something out there in order to get something back. You want extra kindness in your life? Guess what? You've got to give what kindness you have away. And it can be a challenge, right? This widow, she's got nothing. She feels like nothing in life is going right. There's a famine in the land. There's no food. There's no bread. There's no goodness. And you want me to give what little I have away? No, I need to keep that for myself. There's another story I've heard that illustrates this basic principle. It's been around for a long time. I've heard it a few different ways, but basically there's a guy who's off on a hiking trail, and he keeps on hiking, and eventually he goes to his first canteen of water, his second canteen of water. He's out of water, and he's really thirsty, and he sees no water in sight. He keeps on hiking, eventually comes to this abandoned farmhouse where there's one of those old, water pumps, a manual pump for a well. Well, he pumps away at it, and no water comes out. Sure enough, he finds under an old tarp a jug of water. It has a little sign on it. It says something like, well, you can drink this water and you'll have enough to quench your thirst. Or you can pour this water into the pump to prime the pump. And if you do that, you'll have all the water you could possibly need and plenty to refill this jug. So the next person who comes along, well, they can prime the pump too. Like the widow, this guy has a choice. Does she take the little bread that she has? Does this guy take the little bit of water that he has, the sure thing? Or do you put something out there? Does she give a little bit of bread to Elijah? Does the guy prime the pump, what little he has, and hope to get the big return? Both the widow and the guy with the pump, they're promised you'll have more than you need. It won't run out. Well, of course, in both times, the guy with the water, he primes the pump, and sure enough, he keeps pumping, and all the water he gets, he can fill up his canteen 1, his canteen 2, fill up the jug. Everything's great. And the next guy who comes along can get something too. And that's the challenge for us in our life, is to, in the case of the widow, she's serving the prophet, who's basically a symbol for the Lord there. And in the guy with the priming the pump, who's he serving? Well, he's serving that person who's coming behind him. He's serving that next person. Who's he going to think about? It seems so counterintuitive to us that, well, when I need to feel happy and satisfied, that I actually have to serve somebody else first to get that. That's the challenge that the story of Elijah and the widow is trying to show us. If you want to be happy, guess what you got to do? You got to follow the 10 Commandments. You've got to walk the walk. You've got to be living the life like Jesus says, where we put other people first. That's spiritual laws there. And if you want to be happy, you got to put something out there in order to get something back. So in the end, well, how do you get more goodness in your life? Well, you serve God first. If you do that, believe it or not, when you give away what little happiness you have to serve God, He promises you there's plenty more where that came from. Hope that helps. All the best to you. God bless.